I've noticed something weird, and I was wondering if anybody else has noticed this too. There's a crazy amount of powerful elites that have lived really long lives, like well into their 90s and even past 100. What's that all about? We've got Prince Philip, died at 99, Queen Elizabeth, 96, Queen Elizabeth the Mother, died at 101, Jimmy Carter, former president, died at 100, Gerald Ford, former president, died at 93, Ronald Reagan, 93 too, H.W. Bush died at 94, Henry Kissinger died at 100, David Rockefeller, 101, George Soros, 95, he's still alive, Charlie Munger died at 99, Warren Buffett's 95 and he's still living, Nixon was 81, Biden's already 83, we'll see how long they keep him alive for, Clinton 79, but I bet they'll keep him going until his 90s. Recently, Putin and Xi Jinping were caught on hot mic discussing how man can live so much longer now through things like organ transplanting. What in the world were they actually talking about? Listen to this clip. A leader of China before Xi Jinping, Jiang Zemin, died in 2022 at the age of 96. And before him it was Zhao Ziyang in power in China, and he lived to be 85. Xi is currently 72 and his predecessor is 82. In Russia before Putin it was Boris Yeltsin who only lived to 76, but before him it was Gorbachev who led the Soviet Union, and he lived to be 91. And there's a ton more. Look how long this list is. Like, this is weird. It's crazy. Look at all these people. 102, 100, 103. What's going on here? Is it just that they have money and can afford top-tier healthcare? I mean, yeah, that's part of it, but rich people die at a normal age all the time. These people are the super elite, though. I think after researching all this that the signs point to these people having access to advanced medical technology in secret. I think they're using special medical practices not yet known to the general public to achieve this longevity. And the reason they're not telling the public? Maybe it's because they want to keep this technology to themselves. Yeah. But I think it's also because some of these practices are pretty dark in nature. And the general public would look at them as something evil, and even less than human if they could see what they were actually doing to augment their bodies and keep themselves alive. And the people whose lives were taken from them, to add years onto the lives of the elites. To find out exactly what these people are doing to extend their lifespan, we have to trace their steps through history. There's no telling how long this power has been available to man. There's some theories that the elites have had access to this technology for hundreds of years, maybe even thousands. Some people theorize that ancient kings or demigods in one of these civilizations with advanced knowledge like Egypt or Sumer or China, or alchemists in medieval Europe, or secret societies like the Knights Templar, discovered technology to make themselves immortal, the Holy Grail, the sacred ambrosia apple of the gods, the immortal peaches of China, or something like that made them immortal, and still living among us to this day. And they are indeed these elites that rule our world. The theory goes that the same group of immortal men have been controlling Earth all this time. So that would mean some of these kings, billionaires, and leaders of state are actually much older than we believe. But of course, that's just a theory. I actually tend to lean more towards the idea that this technology to extend man's lifespan is fairly new. I think it would be really hard to keep a secret as big as that for so long. But maybe I'm wrong, who knows. We'll go further into some of these stories in a minute, but I tend to believe more that the elites of our world studied these ancient stories and read all the occult books and alchemical teachings regarding life extension. And a lot of them require some pretty barbaric practices. And that's the nice way of putting it. I'd say it's more demonic or vampiric. All just for an extra 10, maybe 20 years of life. And we'll get to the gruesome details on all that in a minute. But to fully understand what these people are doing, we have to look far back into human history, because man has been lusting after immortality since we lost access to the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. And that, of course, is our first story of man trying to reach immortality. Not trying in this case, but actually succeeding. And this idea of a sacred tree that gives immortality and imbues magical powers can be found in every culture. I go into good detail in this in our giant tree video. I'll link it in the description if you haven't seen it, but some of you may have heard of things like the Yggdrasil tree in Scandinavian, the tree of life in Egypt, the tree of life in Mesopotamia, the Ceiba tree in Mayan, the Jianmu world tree in China, or the Fusong tree, or the immortal ambrosia apple of Greek mythology, or the immortal peach tree of Chinese mythology, and the golden apples of Idun in Nordic, or the plant of eternal youth that Gilgamesh found, or even the legends of the Fountain of Youth, and there's many more. But in the story of Adam and Eve, it actually tells us what happened to this tree. And if you notice in all these myths around the world of the sacred immortal fruit or herbs, it's always only allowed to be used by the gods. In these stories we'll go into in a sec, man tries to obtain these items or concoct their own synthetic versions. But only if they have divine lineage are they actually allowed to get their hands on these things. But as you'll see, when man tries to use our earthly resources to become immortal, they become an abomination of their former selves. In the Adam and Eve story, it tells us that God expelled Adam and Eve from the garden, specifically because he wanted to take away their access to the tree of life that makes them live forever. Because we chose the tree of knowledge instead. And it says only when we enter into heaven after the judgment will we gain access to the tree of life again. And many people go looking for the Garden of Eden trying to find this tree of life. That's basically what Gilgamesh did. But in the myths, it's only found in the sacred spaces on earth where the gods lived, and it's always guarded by a divine or ferocious creature, interestingly enough. The cherubim with the flaming sword in Genesis. The dragon Ladon guards the island of Hesperides, where the ambrosia apples grow in Greek. A sea serpent guards the sacred island of the immortals, the island of Penglai, in Chinese. And in Nordic myth, the immortal apples of Idun lie on the other side of the Rainbow Bridge in Asgard. But how do we even know of such things, if they're even true? It's funny, we think of these gods from myths as being immortal, but we never think of how. They weren't just beings that lived forever. They could die, and did die in the myths sometimes. But they were actually literally eating divine fruit that staved off old age, and kept them young and fit. And in Genesis it says that we too had access to this fruit before our fall. But after we were expelled from the garden, there were many who tried to reach this sacred land again, just like we do today. But in the myths it was usually an island, far off in the ocean. No one knew specifically where. It was only through divine guidance that men were led there. But what am I talking about? Well, there's the story of Heracles, the son of Zeus, who had to retrieve one of these sacred ambrosia apples from the island of Hesperides for one of his labors. But he and the king he brought it to knew if they kept them, it would mean the wrath of the gods. So they gave them to the goddess Athena to return to Hesperides. In Nordic, there's a story of Loki and a giant stealing the apples of Idun, instantly causing the gods of Asgard to start aging and losing their vigor. In Chinese, the first emperor after the Warring States period, Qin Shi Huang, attempted to cross the Pacific Ocean and retrieve this immortal peach. This story comes to us from the records of the Grand Historian, which, if you want a hard copy, you can find this book in our book list. I just added a few more there, and anything we talk about in this video I'm adding there too. Anyway, in this story, the emperor seeks the help of a Chinese alchemist in order to gain immortality. He basically sends out a letter to everybody in China, trying to find the secret. Some give him herbs, some even gave him concoctions with mercury because that's what they thought would work. But one tries to help him find this sacred island. At first, he's unsuccessful as he claims to be stopped by that monstrous sea serpent we were talking about. But then he sets out again. But this time he said there was a price that Qin Shi Huang had to pay to the gods of Penglai to gain access, according to the Chinese alchemist. 3,000 young virgin boys and girls. Yeah. And that's just the beginning of it. Nobody actually knows what happened after that because the alchemist never came back. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the death of Gilgamesh's best friend and only companion, Enkidu, is the sole catalyst that prompts his journey to find the immortal herb. It's only after the priestess of the goddess Ishtar tells Gilgamesh of the story of Utnapishtim and the flood that he sets out on his quest for the herb. He goes and finds Utnapishtim, who was said to be the only man to have been given this herb by the god Enki after the flood. When Gilgamesh finds Utnapishtim, he tells him of the location of this sacred herb. what he calls the plant of heartbeat. And it's not where most would expect. The plant itself grew under the ocean, it says, and it was only by strapping rocks onto his feet that Gilgamesh was able to dive down and retrieve it. You know, it makes me think of that old Mesopotamian carving of the men swimming underwater with what looked to be skin bags full of air to breathe from. Maybe he used something like that. Anyway, it's also said that this plant was like a thorn bush. Just a weird detail there. In Hindu mythology, the demons attempt to steal the immortal elixir from the gods. Found in texts like the Mahabharata and the Bhagavata Purana. There's the myth of the Samudra Manthan, churning of the ocean, where the gods, devas, and demons, asuras, collaborate to churn the cosmic ocean to obtain Amrita, the nectar of immortality. They use the mythical Mount Mandara as a churning rod, and the serpent Vasuki as a rope. After many trials, including the emergence of a deadly poison, the Amrita appears in a pot carried by the divine physician, Dhanvantari. The demons attempt to seize it, but Vishnu, who incarnates as the enchantress Mohini, tricks them, ensuring the gods alone drink the Amrita, granting them alone immortality. And then in Egyptian writings we find the story of the Book of Thoth. This story was inscribed during the Middle Kingdom around the 1st to the 3rd century BC, but it no doubt goes back much further, scholars say. In this story it describes a mythical text, the Book of Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and magic. It's said to contain spells to command the heavens and earth, understand the language of the animals and birds, control natural forces, and gain insight into the afterlife, essentially, immortality reserved for the gods. The tale unfolds in a cautionary tone, with the bulk of it narrated by ghosts to deter the hero from this quest. Cautionary because the use of this book by mortals incurs the anger of the gods, much like we saw in the Greek myth. Only this time, the warnings are ignored, and the punishment for messing with these sorts of sciences is worse than death. Prince Setna is depicted as a brilliant but restless scribe and magician, obsessed with ancient lore. While studying inscriptions in the necropolis of Memphis, he learns of the Book of Thoth's existence. Intrigued by its power, Setna enlists his brother, a loyal warrior, to help him locate it. Ancient texts reveal that the book was buried centuries earlier, in a royal tomb in the vast Memphite necropolis, near modern Cairo. Driven by ambition to surpass all scribes, Setna declares, "Without it, life has no meaning for me." The brothers venture into the tomb, which is a labyrinth of chambers filled with treasures and maps, evoking the perilous underworld journey found in Egyptian funerary texts. The tomb that Setna was in was Nain-for-Kapta, a prodigious scholar and son of the pharaoh Amenhotep. Hearing legends of the Book of Thoth hidden in Thoth's storehouse, a divine vault, he petitioned his father for permission to seek it. The pharaoh reluctantly agrees, but warns of divine peril. Nain-for-Kapta sails south to Hermopolis, a sacred place of Thoth. He performs rituals and locates the vault in a hidden island sanctuary in the Nile. The book itself is sealed in an iron box, filled with liquid flame, nestled inside a bronze box with snakes, a stone box with scorpions, and an iron chest guarded by a serpent of eternity. Using magic and incantations, Nain-for-Kapta neutralizes each guardian, reciting spells to freeze the flames or command the serpent. He seizes the book, reads its spells aloud, and instantly gains mastery over nature, hearing birds speak prophecies and bending elements to his will. Ecstatic, he returns to Memphis. Thoth, enraged by the theft, complains to Ra about the violation of his sacred domain. The gods decree punishment. Nain-for-Kapta's wife drowns mysteriously while sailing, and their infant son is possessed by a demon and dies in her arms. Devastated, Nain-for-Kapta attempts suicide, but is denied a quick death. Instead, he haunts the waterways, searching for his family's bodies. He eventually reunites their corpses and is buried with the book in his Memphis tomb, forever cursed to guard it, so you don't want to anger the gods. But it wasn't until the Roman Empire that these stories of all these immortal elixirs started to come together. The Persians had stories from Zoroastrian mythology of the water of life, a spring that granted immortality to whoever drank it, similar to the Greek myth of the Fountain of Youth. These Greek and Persian traditions merged with Egyptian alchemy, centering in the city of Alexandria, the place where a certain library and all its contents was mysteriously lost to history, and nobody knows for sure how it happened. Maybe this was when the knowledge of the elixir was discovered and hidden. But that was said to pretty much be the beginning of alchemy, and when Egypt became Islamic, the Islamic scholars began searching for this immortality elixir. This is when texts from all over the world were translated into Arabic and studied. They even had texts from China and India, and the best scientists of the time tried to develop the elixir of life from all this knowledge, what they called Iksir al-Hayat. This is where we start to get into the nitty-gritty of it. The whole transmutation of mercury to gold, and it being some kind of metaphor for the transmutation of the soul from basic mortal to divine immortal being. And there's a lot to unpack to all this. These early Islamic scholars and later European alchemists were doing many things to try to create the elixir of life, or what some called the philosopher's stone. But mainly in particular, they were trying to find a way to scientifically alter a person's makeup, whether that means their energy or spirit or their DNA or something. It's not well described. But they were trying to alter themselves in such a way that made them rejuvenate their bodies and spirits to stay young forever. Some did this in a positive and spiritual way. Others looked into concoctions and medicines, leading to all kinds of scientific discoveries. But there were some of them that turned to black magic and the dark arts. But did any succeed? It's possible. We know stories of many well-known alchemists trying to find some kind of fix-all cure to give man more years, what is essentially the literal elixir of life. And they did discover things that could help, like ginseng and goji berry in China. Islamic alchemists invented distillation of alcohol, leading to things like extraction of oils and plants for medicine, or tinctures of herbs and alcohol. But that alone won't make you live past 100. To do something like that, it took a more extreme approach. Like I said, some took this on a spiritual, positive route. Others sought help from evil spirits and ancient rituals. Aside from seeking the help of spirits or performing rituals to increase vitality, a lot of these alchemists were obsessed with blood. They believed blood held the key to the philosopher's stone, and there was some way to use blood in order to extend one's own life, but they needed to experiment to find out. And these experiments led down a dark path: grave robbing, harvesting the blood of criminals, and even child sacrifice. For instance, there's a 15th century legend of a guy named Gilles de Rais, a French noble and alleged alchemist, who claimed he killed children to use their blood in alchemical rituals. But this actually goes all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia and Egypt, where alchemical practices sometimes involved animal and even human sacrifices to appease deities, or extract vital essences for elixirs, concocted by the Magi and early alchemists. I'm not going to show these images, some of them get pretty dark, but if you do want to check these out, I'll post them on X at Old World Tales. We even see this on the other side of the world in Central America, with the Maya, who would perform bloodletting rituals to appease the gods and increase vitality. And then we all know what happened during the height of the Aztec Empire. And yes, the Mesoamericans would often consume blood too, believing it would bring them closer to the gods. All these ancient cultures saw blood as a life-giving force containing the essence of human spirit itself. And just like vampires in the myths, the consumption of young vital blood allows one to live forever. Like Vlad the Impaler in the 15th century, who some said would drink the blood of his enemies to keep himself young. Or the Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary, from the same region as Vlad a century later, and distantly related through noble lineage. She was infamous for her practice of abducting virgin peasant girls to torture and steal their blood and bathe in it. They say she believed it restored her own youth and beauty. Or there's the story of Pope Innocent VIII, who on his deathbed had physicians bring him 3 young boys for their blood. It's believed that he either drank the blood or injected it with some crude early method. All parties involved died. There's also an old belief during medieval times of what's called the blood libel. Now, I'm in no way saying this is true, but it's interesting to note some of these old beliefs that people had in the Middle Ages. But this was an accusation made by certain groups similar to the accusation of witchcraft in places like Salem. But it was an accusation that some Jewish groups were ritualistically taking the blood of Gentile children, and not only using it in ceremonies and rituals, but also consuming it. Now, I can't even show you these old artworks I found, but if you want to check these out, I'll post them to X at Old World Tales. But here's what Wikipedia says. The blood libel, also known as the ritual murder libel, is a long-standing anti-Semitic accusation that originated in medieval Europe, with the earliest documented cases in 1144 in Norwich, England, where Jews were falsely accused of murdering a Christian boy named William to use his blood in religious rituals. This myth, built on earlier ancient slanders against Jews and sometimes early Christians, involved human sacrifice. But it evolved into a specifically anti-Jewish trope during the Middle Ages, often tied to Christian Easter or Jewish Passover seasons, and it spread across Europe, leading to expulsions and executions. The core old belief was that the Jews engaged in secret organized rituals requiring the blood of non-Jews, particularly Christian children, as a religious necessity or to fulfill prophecies. Accusers claimed that Jews would hold international councils to select a victim each year, choosing a country or city for the act, sometimes framing it as a way for Jews to hasten their return to the Holy Land, or to mock the crucifixion of Jesus. This was portrayed as a widespread Jewish conspiracy, reinforced by forced confessions under torture, and church-endorsed cults venerating the alleged child victims as martyrs. What a lot of these people that were using blood in this way were most likely doing was using the information they got from these old Egyptian, Arabic, and Greek alchemists. There's texts like the Picatrix, an Arabic grimoire that describes rituals that call for human parts, including blood, believing it enhances a ritual's powers. Or the Emerald Tablets of Hermes Trismegistus. This was a foundational alchemical text, originating in the Islamic world and translated into Latin. It doesn't explicitly mention blood, but establishes the concept of a universal life force, or tincture, that animates matter. Later European alchemists interpreted blood as a physical manifestation of this force, in younger humans especially. Commentaries by alchemists like Albertus Magnus in the 13th century linked blood to the spiritus, or vital spirit, in the alchemical processes, suggesting it could enhance elixirs. For example, blood was seen as a medium for transferring vitality in distillation experiments. Paracelsus, a Swiss alchemist and physician, wrote extensively on the body's vital forces in works like the De Natura Rerum and the Archidoxus. He viewed blood as a key carrier of the archeus, the life principle. In De Natura Rerum, Paracelsus describes using blood in medicinal preparations to restore vitality. He suggests distilling blood extracts into what he called the quintessence for tonics, believing it could strengthen the body against disease. He would often use blood-based remedies for anemia or weakness in the body. Don't worry, these texts are all going in the book list too. But as you can kind of infer from all this, they began to take a more scientific and less esoteric approach as time went on. But just because something is done scientifically doesn't mean it's not absolutely messed up. What a lot of these texts fail to mention is how they sourced the blood. Don't get me wrong, some of these alchemists got it from cadavers or criminals or even themselves, but the real hardcore ones knew you needed young blood to get real results. Just like the gods of Penglai in China demanded, just like the pagan gods of the Phoenicians required, and just like what the elites are doing today. But it wasn't just young blood. Some say it was more specific, like the stories of Countess Elizabeth Bathory of Hungary. These people they were taking the blood from were tortured, and some of the darker alchemists no doubt knew this fact too, because doing that is said to change the blood chemistry. But that's all we can really say on this platform about that, because that's where it gets too dark to go into. Maybe we can go in further detail later on X or Rumble, but for now, let's just say modern occultists and powerful individuals in modern history have looked deeply into all these ancient beliefs about extending the life and the power of blood. Like, come on, you think someone like Adolf Hitler or Mao Zedong didn't look into every single possible way to preserve youth forever? And you think powerful individuals in our age aren't doing the same thing? The tradition of searching for immortality is a staple among Chinese emperors, like we showed with Qin Shi Huang. Mao Zedong did the same thing. Mao literally had his body preserved in an oxygen-free tank like they do with the Egyptian mummies in museums, to preserve himself because he thought they'd be able to reanimate him someday. This is real. They literally still have the body of Mao perfectly preserved in glass, looking like he died yesterday. You think these people didn't have blood boys? A lot of them do today, and I'd put money on it being more common than it's told to us. A lot of billionaires and powerful individuals today will find a child around the age of 18 with the same blood type as them, and have him periodically give his blood and inject it into the older individual. This was thought to be a conspiracy for many years, but it's come out that yes, indeed, a lot of people are doing this. That guy Brian Johnson, who's trying to live to 120, does this with his son, and he's very open about it. I actually can't believe how much he's revealed. That's a good guy to watch to get some insight on what these elites are doing. And some of the stuff he does is even pretty dark, aside from taking his son's blood, which is absolutely fucked up if you ask me. But he's also used gene editing technology to make his body hold more muscle and less fat. He's removed all his body's plasma, so he can get all the toxins that are bound in the plasma out. It'll be interesting to see how long he lives. But what the higher elites are doing is even more messed up than that. Like I said, we can't even get into it here, but it rhymes with Medina comb. Like I said, the chemical state of the blood itself matters. And the introduction of high amounts of adrenaline apparently make all the difference, the theory says. But to find out if what these people today are doing is just extending their life by a few years, or actually making themselves live for hundreds, we have to look again to the stories of men in the age of alchemists in Europe, who attempted such things, and were said to have actually found success. The most famous of these being the Count of Saint Germain, but there are others. The Count of Saint Germain, in several accounts, was said to never age, even over a 50-year period, but no one really knows what happened to him. Maybe he died. Maybe he actually did achieve immortality, and still lives among us. The legends say he successfully either created or had access to the Philosopher's Stone, that legendary substance that transmutes lead into gold, in a metaphorical sense, changing a man's old and dead cells into new, young, rejuvenated cells. And of course, the source of his knowledge was from secret societies due to his noble blood, hinting at the possibility that all noble Europeans have access to this life extension or youth-preserving alchemical technology since the era of Count Saint Germain in the 18th century. But if it's true and he did get this technology from secret societies or alchemical experiments, then it's been known for at least a few hundred years before he lived, maybe even going back all the way to those Islamic scholars or early proto-alchemy scholars in Egypt. But aside from the Count of Saint Germain, there was also a legend of a man similar to the Count, named Alessandro Cagliostro, an Italian adventurer and self-proclaimed magician. He actually claimed to have met the Count of Saint Germain, as they were prominent during the same time period. Cagliostro promoted Egyptian Freemasonry, and also rituals he said granted him magical powers. He also claimed to have taken the sacred elixir and gained an immortal body. He was active in European courts, including France and Russia, and he performed miracles, like psychic healings and alchemy, but was eventually imprisoned by the Inquisition for heresy. And then there's the famous 17th century philosopher and scientist, Sir Francis Bacon, whose life we could make a whole video about on its own, but aside from his many accomplishments, influence on society, and connection to secret societies, some esoteric traditions, including theosophy, claimed Bacon discovered alchemical secrets for immortality. They say he faked his death and may even still live among us. Francis Bacon was linked to Rosicrucianism and is said to have authored hidden texts on transmutations and eternal life. Theory suggests he used either a resurrection body or an elixir to extend his existence, influencing Enlightenment-era mysticism. And this guy was as elite as they come. He was the chief legal officer under King James I in England. Some theories say he was the one who wrote the King James Bible, infusing the writings of the prophets and disciples with his vast knowledge of mysticism. Others say he was the real Shakespeare, and wrote all the legendary Shakespearean plays. But these are all just theories. Nobody really knows for sure, unless one of these secret societies has some kind of proof hidden somewhere. Who knows? Actually, the founder of the Rosicrucian order was also said to have similar knowledge of life-extending technology. Christian Rosenkreutz also lived in the 17th century, was described as an alchemist who traveled to the east, acquired secret knowledge of transmutation and the elixir of life, and lived to 106. His tomb was discovered containing mystical artifacts, one of which was called the Book T, or Book of the World. Legends portray him as achieving a form of spiritual immortality, or reincarnation, sometimes compared to biblical figures like Lazarus, who rose from the dead. By the 18th century, theories emerged that Saint Germain was a reincarnation or alias of Rosenkreutz, trying to broader European occult revivals. All of this alchemical research and occult studies to add years to one's life is the classic quest for the Holy Grail, the sacred cup of Christ, said to have been used by him at the Last Supper, and then later used to catch a drop of his blood as he hung on the cross, thought to imbue immortal life to whoever drinks from it. But in the myths, the quest itself for the Grail can either bring about great prosperity and transmutation of the body and spirit into a positive eternal form, or it can bring about a man's downfall, leading him down paths a normal man would never dare take, and overtaking his mind until no part of him resembles who he once was, and the transmutation is from human to devil. You can see it in all these elites' faces. They lose their humanity behind their eyes. There's an old belief that a person's face, over time, will slowly show who they really are. And there's some truth to it. If you're an angry person, your face will start to mold and wrinkle until your resting face looks mad, and vice versa if you're a joyful person. But in the olden days in Europe and America, it was believed by Christians that if a person engages in evil rituals or converses with spirits, it will take a toll on their physical body, and you'll be able to see the changes in their face. That's why there's all those old tropes of witches having big noses or a pointy chin and moles and deformities all over them. Each ritual or deal they make with spirits would slowly morph their body into something ugly and demonic. It's like they're slowly giving themselves over to the darkness. Just look into some of these people's eyes. Just nothingness staring back at you. Empty. Any dark or evil activity a man does is a chip on his soul, and eventually the physical body will show this decay. It's a sort of poetic justice from the universe, and we can see it played out in a lot of movies. Like in Star Wars, when a person turns to the dark side, he slowly takes on evil features as he progresses in his use of the dark side of the Force, like the yellow Sith eyes, or their skin turns pale and sickly. Their voice gets raspy and their hair turns white, and they age rapidly. Despite being able to sustain their life using the dark side of the Force and live for hundreds, even thousands of years, eventually they lose all life energy and become completely consumed by the darkness, becoming a sort of walking corpse held together by pure hatred. Alright, so let's talk about some of the things the elites are doing today. First, let's go over the things we know for certain. So we already talked a little bit about the blood transfusions from the young blood donors. Already super fucked up right off the bat. But it's true, you can look this up. As expected, most who do this like to keep it between them, their doctor, and their blood boy. But it is happening. Young men have come forward showing the contracts these elites make them sign to become their blood boy. And they pay them huge amounts of money to do this. There's also drugs the elites take to do things like slow cellular death and increase the lifespan of the telomeres. An example being OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, who takes metformin, a diabetes drug, to potentially slow aging. A common trend among Silicon Valley biohackers. Others will play around with the air they breathe. A lot of them buy these huge expensive hyperbaric chambers, where pressure and oxygen levels are controlled. And it's been shown that increasing pressure along with oxygen can actually extend the telomeres and reverse biological age. Pro athletes use these things to recover from a workout, allowing them to train for 2 sessions in one day. And trauma victims and injured veterans even use them to heal their wounds faster. But a lot of these billionaires have one in their own home and use them daily. And there have been many theologists and even some scientists who have theorized that this high pressure and high oxygen environment may have actually been what the Earth was like during the age that the ancient writings like the Sumerian King's List, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the writings of Hesiod telling of the golden age of Zeus, or the book of Genesis in the Bible spoke of, when man lived hundreds, almost thousands of years. In all these stories, it seems the changing factor from then to now was the flood, the one that almost every single culture on Earth has a myth about. Experts theorize that this extreme cataclysmic event, or whatever caused it, also caused the atmosphere to change significantly, leading to lower average air pressure and lower oxygen levels, not only causing man to have reduced lifespan, but also causing a mass extinction of a lot of animal species, as some of them had biology that was specifically geared to get that extra oxygen in their bloodstream. And then there's the organ harvesting. This is the stuff Putin and Xi Jinping were talking about when they got caught on hot mic. Yeah, they said something how man can live longer because they're transplanting new organs into them. Sure, but that doesn't quite track. What I think they're really referring to was the harvesting of organs. It's well known that the Chinese government harvests the organs of people in their work camps, mostly the Uyghurs. It's all kept well under wraps though, so it's unclear exactly what they're doing with these harvested organs. But I think we can guess. What I think they're doing is the same thing the US government did with the Henrietta Lacks immortal tumor cells. They're trying to create immortal organs to transplant into themselves, if they haven't already succeeded in doing so behind closed doors and black projects. Henrietta Lacks was a woman born in 1920 who died in 1951 of aggressive cervical cancer at the age of 31. During her treatments, doctors without her knowledge harvested cell samples from her tumor. This was apparently a normal practice back then. It's almost like they were looking for something. And they still do this today, they just take cells from aborted fetuses or donor cadavers. But whatever they were looking for, they found in Henrietta Lacks. Her tumor cells refused to die. They call them immortal cell lines. And these cells found in one woman in 1951 have been used in over 100,000 published studies and are linked to nearly 11,000 patents. Things like the development of the polio vaccine, advances in cancer research, gene mapping, and understanding viruses like HIV and HPV, testing for cosmetics, radiation effects, and even space travel. They've literally sent these cells into orbit to study how they handle space. Billions of tons of these cells have been grown worldwide from this first original sample. They're still sold commercially today for research, but the potential of these cells is even greater. When used in conjunction with things like gene editing, 3D organ printing, and stem cells, the potential is the creation of immortal organs. I found this from biomedicalcentral.com. Researchers are working on conditionally immortalized cell lines, engineered to be immortal in the lab but switchable to normal behavior for implantation. Combining immortal cell lines with bioprinting or decellularized scaffolds, removing cells from donor organs and repopulating with new ones, could lead to longer-lasting tissues. In regenerative therapy, this might extend organ lifespan for transplants, reducing rejection or aging issues. For an organ to be fully immortal, it would require breakthroughs in telomerase control and anti-senescence tech, potentially by 2040 or 2050, if trends in longevity research continue. Very interesting stuff. It seems, though, that the cancerous nature of the Henrietta Lacks cells makes them more difficult to work with, so the search continues. Some have even gone as far as to say that the reason for all this use of chemicals in our environment, or pesticides, or additives in our water like fluoride or chlorine, or plastics and forever chemicals and everything, and all these synthetic drugs we're given, is because those in power over our world are trying to push the human body to its limit, to find this immortal cell line or something along those lines, or warp our very DNA until somebody's born with something in their biology that unlocks immortality. But even if they found that key, us normal people would never know. These elites who are slowly getting older are doing absolutely everything they can to live longer. Even the richest people on Earth like Putin and Xi, people with access to entire nations of researchers and scientists, are putting huge amounts of resources into these studies. And another thing that shows promise is gene editing. Just like the blood infusions and harvesting of cells, this one can get dark real fast. The potential of CRISPR gene editing is beyond imagination. They could literally change your entire genome and turn you into a hybrid creature. This is not imaginary. It's not fake. It's actual science. This stuff is crazy. and extremely complex and easy to just give someone cancer or something if the wrong gene is mutated. So the technology to just change someone's DNA and make them live forever isn't there yet. It's still in the experimental phase. Basically, it's not as simple as you just find the gene that makes lizards regrow limbs and you inject that in a human. We don't know how all these genes will affect the rest of the genome. They still say 99% of human DNA is junk. Scientists really don't understand the human genome much yet at all. But that doesn't stop these people from trying. I'd be willing to bet that there are some pretty crazy experiments that go on in far-off places, off any sort of record or books. Just look at some of the projects that have leaked already. In 2018, a scientist in China was caught using CRISPR technology to change the genome of 3 human embryos, attempting to make them immune to HIV. This is from science.org. The editing did not fully succeed as intended. In the twins, the CRISPR edits created mosaicism, uneven gene changes across cells, and unintended mutations. One twin has edits in both copies of CCR5 gene, potentially offering HIV resistance, while the other has only one copy edited, which might provide partial or no protection. There were also off-target effects raising the risks of unintended health issues like increasing susceptibility to viruses such as West Nile or influenza. Experts have criticized the work as premature, unethical, and scientifically flawed, with no clear evidence that the children are actually immune to HIV. However, the man did claim the edits worked based on the lab test that he did. But this was extremely risky and things could have absolutely gone horrific in a number of ways. This is the only example we have of an experiment on a human. If this is happening, it's not known to the public. But there have been lots of experiments editing the genes of animals that had gruesome results. In an effort to enhance muscle growth, gene-edited pigs unexpectedly grew additional vertebrae, altering their skeletal structure in the experiment. Another experiment attempted to produce leaner, less fatty rabbits for potential meat production. Some of the rabbits developed abnormally large tongues, so large it impaired their breathing, giving less oxygen to their brain. Another experiment on pigs aimed at making them resistant to a viral disease. The editing instead caused a range of abnormalities: missing teeth, bulging eyes, cataracts, and a significantly reduced lifespan. In another one, scientists set out to create double-muscled animals for higher meat yield. These edits resulted in leg weakness syndrome, particularly in pigs, leading to mobility problems and a young death. Other experiments have resulted in unexpected disease, arrays of small health issues, malformed or missing limbs, enlarged hearts, and other dangerous unexpected mutations. Elon Musk once said in an interview while expressing the danger of this technology that it could literally turn a person into a butterfly, he used as an example.
I think there's going to be a lot of breakthroughs on the medical front, particularly around synthetic mRNA. You can basically do anything with synthetic RNA, DNA. It's like a computer program. So, I think with enough, with effort that's not too crazy, you could probably stop aging, reverse it if you want. You can basically do anything. You can turn someone into a freaking butterfly if you want with the right DNA sequence.
CRISPR editing the gene of a human embryo is extremely illegal. But what's not illegal in a lot of these countries is gene therapy, they call it. It is illegal in most countries, but billionaires will travel to places like Honduras or Montenegro to undergo these treatments. They involve introducing or modifying genes to target aging processes like muscle loss, inflammation, cellular senescence, or epigenetic changes. Much of this is still experimental and lacks long-term data, and it carries those same risks as CRISPR, like cancer, organ failure, or those unintended mutations. Like we said earlier, that guy Brian Johnson did one of these treatments, and he has a whole video about it. He underwent something called follostatin gene therapy for muscle enhancement and anti-inflammation. This involves injecting non-viral DNA plasmids to overexpress the follostatin gene, which inhibits myostatin, a muscle growth limiter. It's promoted for combating age-related frailty, boosting muscle mass, reducing body fat, and potentially extending lifespan by addressing sarcopenia and inflammation. Preclinical rodent studies showed 30% lifespan increase, but human data is limited to small, unpublished trials. The company, MiniCircle, is funded by OpenAI's Sam Altman and Palantir's Peter Thiel. Over 500 people have received it since 2022, with the therapy including a tetracycline off switch for safety. Risks include potential cancer or liver issues, according to Popular Mechanics. The Amazon founder Jeff Bezos has poured his funds into something called Alto Labs, a biotech startup focused on cellular rejuvenation programming. Their technology uses gene-based techniques to, quote, reset cellular age, to revert cells to a youthful state without full stem cell conversion. It's aimed at reversing disease, injury, and age-related decline at the molecular level. Peter Thiel also invests in similar companies like Unity Biotechnology. There's also mitochondrial gene therapies and transplants, targeting mitochondrial DNA. They'll literally transplant healthy mitochondria to restore energy production and reduce oxidative stress. And there's all kinds of other weird techniques all these companies have been experimenting with. All these technologies could be promising and will become part of normal life and common medicine over the next few decades. But to the average person, it just seems wrong to change your DNA. One problem I have with it is that we don't really know what animates us or the source of the human soul. Is changing the DNA makeup of our body affecting the soul or even the brain? If you ask me, turning ourselves into a chimera, even if it's just by a fraction of a percent to make us live longer, is not what humans are meant to do. We can be sure that there's something about us that makes us different than the rest of the animal species, and we can't quite put our finger on it. Yeah, it's our intelligence, but where does that come from? Our genes are no doubt tied into that, and messing with that complex synergy could have horrific, even demonic consequences. In Genesis, there's a story of a group of angelic beings coming down to earth and interbreeding with man, causing all kinds of deformations and unnatural traits in their offspring. This human-angel interbreeding was said to create supermen, giants, and demigods, beings that lived extremely long lifespans. And then what happened? God sent the flood because these creatures were an abomination to him. And the sole intention in their hearts was pure evil, it said. They had lost all humanity inside of them. And what does the Bible say about our time today? It says that it will be like the days of Noah in the end times. But all that is only the stuff the public knows about. There's no doubt in my mind that elites and governments are working on black projects right now that would both amaze and terrify you. Jeffrey Epstein was using breeding programs on his ranch in New Mexico to try and improve the human race and select for favorable traits. He also wanted to seed the world with his own DNA. He also once tried to start a company in the Virgin Islands that would create a database of the locals' genes to build a population-level genetic database, to create a search engine to identify links between genes and diseases, and establish a virtual laboratory for computer modeling experiments. This is what the Chinese government does on the Uyghurs, harvest their DNA for experimentation. We really have no idea the extent of what is going on behind closed doors and hidden as secret classified projects. If I had to take a guess, I would say there's probably genetic information in a database on every single person in developed countries in the hands of the major governments. And there's definitely some crazy experimentation happening off the books funded by some of these Jeffrey Epstein type elites. But that's the dark side to all this. Remember, I said there's some people in history that have taken this type of science down a positive route and achieved unbelievable results. But venturing down this path requires complete discipline, and it means changing one's entire spirit and dedicating their life to this practice. Because there have been plenty of people that have lived past 100, and some stories even tell of people living upwards of 200 or even 500 years, not through technology, but through spiritual practice, essentially attaining enlightenment. Other stories tell of entire regions of Earth that have precise conditions possibly similar to what Earth was like before the flood, when people were living to 900. In some of these places, it was historically known that people lived for hundreds of years, but slowly as the modern world encroached, that number went down, where now these people only live to their 90s or around 100, although some still reach upwards of 110 or even 120, they say. A lot of these places are small villages in China. One story of this we have is of a Chinese herbalist, Li Qin Yuan. said to have lived to be 256 years old, born in 1677 in Zhejiang County, Sichuan Province, during the Qin Dynasty. He reportedly lived until 1933. He was described as an herbalist, a martial artist, and tactical advisor in the military at one point, who attributed his extreme lifespan to a disciplined lifestyle, including a diet of herbs like goji berries and wild ginseng. He claimed to have traveled extensively as a child, gathering herbs all across regions of China, Tibet, even Vietnam and Thailand. People even have claimed to have found imperial records congratulating him on his 100th, 150th, and 200th birthdays, reflecting his military service. He even wrote a book with his disciples in 1908 titled The Secrets of Li Qinyuang's Immortality. And it was hard to find direct translations, but there's one on Amazon that seems pretty reputable. But I'm definitely adding this to the books I'm going to read, and I'll add it to our book list as well. But it says this on Wikipedia. At age 130, Li met a 500-year-old hermit who taught him Bagua Zhang and Qigong exercises, which he practiced daily for 120 years. Li's famous advice for longevity was, keep a quiet heart, sit like a tortoise, walk sprightly like a pigeon, and sleep like a dog. He was said to have fathered over 200 descendants across 11 generations, outlived 23 or 24 wives, and physically he was described as tall, around 7 feet, with long fingernails and good eyesight, and a youthful appearance even in old age. But if this was all true, and there was some kind of secret martial art or Qigong practice that extended somebody's life beyond 100 years, then there would be more stories like this. And of course there are. Just like in Genesis and the mythologies, Chinese myth tells us men lived up to 800 years or so back during the mythological dynasties. But there's also a ton of more recent stories, like the one we just talked about the people living several hundred years. There was Chen Jun, a figure from the Tang to Yuan dynasty, from 881 to 1324 AD, who claimed to have lived 443 years. Also, I apologize ahead of time for my pronouncing of these names, but there was a guy named Hui Zhao, a Tang dynasty monk, reportedly lived 290 years, from 526 to 815 AD. Or Zhu Ci, from the Three Kingdoms period, around 220 to 280 AD, who was a Taoist monk and alchemist, said to have lived 300 years, through elixirs and magic. There's also the story of the hermit Lu Zigui, who lived alone in a cave eating pine nuts, mushrooms, and spring water. He once met a Tang emperor's envoy who asked his age. He replies, "I've seen 3 emperors die," placing his age around 300 years. There was also Liu Gen of the Jin dynasty, around 300 AD, who in Chinese text was said to have caught a glowing carp that spoke and said, "Eat my liver, you'll live long." He did, and lived to see the fall of the Jin and rise of the southern dynasties around 200 years. A 7th century researcher of medicine in China documented interviews with extremely old farmers. In his text, the Qian Jin Yao Feng, he interviewed a farmer in Sichuan, said to be around 180 years old, who said his secret was eating goji berries, walnuts, and millet daily. And then an herbalist in Hunan, around 150 years old, practiced Tao Yin breathing exercises every dawn to keep his longevity. There's also the story of the 3 elders of Yangzhou, who lived 280 years, 250 years, and 220 years. And then there's also Bodhidharma, the inventor of some of the first Kung Fu and Qigong forms, at the Shaolin Temple. He was said to have lived to 150, even 180 in some accounts. And there's tons of other stories just like these. Even the ancient Greeks wrote about what are believed to be Chinese people that they said lived around 300-year lifespans back then. They called them the Saris, and all the famous Greek and Roman writers spoke of them. Among the Saris, it is said that men live 200 years, and that their women only give birth once in their lives. Sirabo said this about them: "The Saris are people living beyond the Indians towards the north. They are long-lived and reach 200 years. Their land produces silk from trees." Pausania said, "There the Saris live at the edge of the world. They are said to live 300 years, and their silk comes from worms that spin on trees." And then Lucian of Samosata said, "There are whole nations that are very long-lived like the Saris, who are said to live 300 years. Some attribute their age to the climate, others to the soil, and others still say that it's due to their drinking water, which also accounts for the unusual clearness of their eyes." And Dionysus Periegetes said, "At the world's end dwell the seers, who comb soft wool from the leaves and live in peace." So even the Greeks and Romans knew of these legends. And the Greeks had other legends of people living past 100 as well. In Homer's Iliad, Nestor, king of Pylos, was said to have lived through 2 generations of mortal man and ruled over the third. This is generally calculated around 100 to 120 years, and up to 300 years in some calculations. In Hesiod's Work in Days, he mentions Tiresias, the blind Theban prophet, who is said in fragments to have lived 7 generations, about 175 to 210 years. And then in Herodotus' histories, he tells of the Macrobioi, or Ethiopians, who lived to 120 years or more due to their diet of boiled meat and milk, it said. And then there's also some in India, he said, that lived to 130 as well. I've also heard some oral stories and legends that say there were many Native American holy men and elders that lived past 100 back before the Europeans arrived. I've heard these stories out of several North American tribes. The Hopi and Navajo, the Lakota, and the Cherokee, and others, I'm sure. If I had to guess, I bet you could probably find the same stories in Central and South America, and probably out into the Pacific Islands as well. Another thing to think about too is how long some other sort of enlightened figures in history may have lived had they not been killed. Like the disciples of Jesus. They could heal the sick and perform miracles, but 11 of the 12 original disciples were martyred. But John lived to be somewhere around 100, it's believed. And many later saints lived past 100 as well. So what do we think? Is it possible to live past 120? Were there people in history that were routinely doing it? And have the elites today figured out a way to end human mortality? At the very least, I do really believe they have something that makes them live into their 90s and low 100s. But I'm sure that technology is quickly progressing. The problem is you can see them losing the humanity in their face. They literally look like devils. This is not what a normal centenarian looks like. This is a result of artificially animating the body through dark and experimental medical practices, and sometimes spiritual, I'm sure. Alright, that's all we have for now on this subject. Thank you to those of you who stuck through till the end. Let me know what you think in the comments. Am I in the ballpark with this one? What else did I miss? Let me know. I do read most of those. Go follow me on X, that's where I'm active, and check us out on Patreon if you want to support the channel. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next time.